Hello guys, welcome to the channel. In this video we're going to be talking about scope in JavaScript. So let's get started. So scope is what determines the accessibility of variables. So we have three different types of scopes in JavaScript. So we have the global scope, and the function scope, and the block scope. So first let's see how the global scope works. And I will define a variable and give it a tree as a value, and then I will print this variable into the console, and as you can see here, tree is being printed. Okay, no problems. And if I define a function here, and let's say let's name it function1, for example, and this function also can have access to this variable. So if I now if I move this line, and then let's call our function1, it will also have access to the variable x. Okay, so global variables can be accessed from your entire application. So that's how global scope works. Okay, and now let's move on to function scope. Now let's define a variable here inside of this function, and let's call it y, and then assign it to 7, for example. Now if I let's move this, and instead I will print y, and I will move this variable. Now function1 have access to this variable y, but if I try to access this variable outside of this function, I will get an error. So here uncaught y is not defined. Okay, so this is how function scope works. Variables defined inside of functions can only be accessed inside of these functions. Okay, and now I will define another function, and let's call it function2, and of course we can nest functions inside of each other. And I will output y to the screen, and of course we need to call function2, and then as you can see, function2 also can have access to y variable. Okay, but now let's define another variable, and let's call it set, and then assign it to true, for example. And now I will output this z variable, and as we can see here, we are getting true. But if we try to access this variable from outside the function2, we will get an error, and that's because here it says z is not defined, and that's because z variable was defined inside of function2 scope, and therefore z variable will be only accessible in function2. Okay, so now this doesn't work. Okay, so now function2 can have access to the variables that were defined inside function1, but function1 cannot have access to variables inside function2. Okay, so this is how function scope works. Okay, and now let's move on to the block scope. Now the block scope was introduced to JavaScript with ES6. So before ES6, JavaScript didn't have block scope. It only had global and function scope. So block scope only works with the let and const keywords. So if I say if and then true, and inside of curly brackets, so this is what's known as a block scope. So this is this area inside of these curly brackets is known as block scope. So if I define a variable using the let keyword here, let's say let x, and then assign it to 10, for example, and if I log this variable, I will get 10. But if I try to access this variable from outside this block, I will get an error, as you can see here. So variables, and that's the case also when I use the const keyword. Okay, But now if I use the var keyword here, notice what will happen. There's no error message here. So when we use the var keyword, the block scope does not work. So the block scope only works with let and const keywords. So and this block scope can be anything. Can be the block of function, or a for loop, or a while loop, or anything. So block scope variables can be accessed only from this scope, from the scope that they were defined in. So that's the block scope, and I hope you enjoyed this video. See you in another one.